Holla ballers, what's going on? Today we're looking at Bioshock Infinite Burial at Sea Part 2. Just came out, played through it non-stop. I'm just going to put it straight out there. You should buy this immediately if you're a fan of the series. No spoilers in this. I'm going to show you stuff that's basically from the trailer and a little bit of gameplay afterwards. But man, wow. We could be forgiven for thinking this was going to be terrible. The DLC for Bioshock Infinite, one of my games of the year last year, easily one of the best stories I've ever played in a video game, was really let down by the DLC that came after it. The shitty arena thing was a waste of time. The gunplay isn't the best in Bioshock. That wasn't what we were playing for. And then we got Burial at Sea Part 1, which was not only completely reworked, it was supposed to be combat free. Wasn't. At least 50% of that 1 hour DLC. It took me exactly 1 hour and 4 minutes to finish Bioshock Infinite Burial at Sea Part 1. Was gunplay, which was very odd. It was almost comical, in fact. One of the mini-bosses was just trash and looked stupid and silly. And you got a sour taste in your mouth. Even the story I thought was contrived and had some plot holes in it which I really didn't agree with, and therefore I felt like it was just a cash-in. The fact that they were throwing us back into Rapture just felt like, hey, you know what? We're gonna put Rapture back in, and then of course Irrational shut down, and then we seem to think to ourselves, well, where does that leave the Bioshock universe? In the hands of somebody else? Are they gonna care about it? Because it certainly seemed after Burial at Sea Part 1 that Irrational didn't give a shit about it either. And then Part 2 comes out, and my god, this game is fucking stunning. And I call it a game because it felt like I was playing through a whole game. It's certainly an appropriate length. Really much longer than Bioshock Infinite Part 1. And I've got to say, it did things right. One of the big problems I had with Part 1 was that we were returning to Rapture. And if you've ever played the Bioshock series, you'll be aware that Rapture was a terrifying place. Rapture was a horrifying place. Incredibly tense moments in that game that were really sending shivers up your spine about how horrific the world of Rapture had become. This place that had fallen from grace. But we could forgive it in Columbia because it was quite cutesy and cuddly. Columbia is a stark contrast to the original Rapture. Still maintaining the Bioshock ethos, but definitely not in the idea of being like a survivalish horror type game. Bioshock Infinite Burial at Sea Part 1 was cutes and cuddly. It was actually quite a nice place, all things considered. If it wasn't for the fact that a major character like Sander Cohen returned, it would have not had that macabre atmosphere, that really twisted, omnipotent presence that some of those people had because of their egos. And I was thankful that at least that character was in there and he was done well in Part 1, that I got something out of that DLC. The best thing that I found in Part 2 is that it is tense non-stop and really scary. They turn up the scare factor very quickly, and it's not till later in the game that you realise you can kind of get around the fear factor a little bit, but the fact that you're playing Elizabeth, who's noticeably a weaker character than Booker, is interesting because you're terrified of getting killed. But Elizabeth cannot withstand more than 1 or 2 hits from anything in the game, or she will die. And on top of that, they reintroduce Big Daddies. Again, no spoilers, but the Big Daddies are in there, thank God. And yeah, they're absolutely freaking scary as fuck because you can't possibly go up against them. And it's just wonderful to see that ethos return. But the big thing that I think most of us are going to like is that we play the Bioshock games purely, really for the story. The gunplay has never been great. But it's okay in this one, okay? So it's not too bad. It's not too bad. We do have a lot of choice of weaponry and quite a few little vigors to play around with. But what we do have is just an absolutely fantastic story that ties up so much. It is the Ozymandias of Breaking Bad. That's what this DLC is. And if you are a remote fan of Bioshock, Bioshock 2, and certainly of Infinite, it is so worth playing this to see how all those universes collide. How everything ties together. It answers so goddamn much. And really, I've thought through it. I replayed certain moments in my mind. I couldn't find mega plot holes or things that didn't really make any sense. But what I did find is answers to questions that I found from Part 1 and Infinite. Things that I thought, God, you know what? It doesn't really make any sense. Or why would we do that? Why would, how did we end up here? How did this happen? And Part 2 really ties all of those things up. And it does a great job of it. And it introduces more things that you might not have considered. It introduces ideas about things like the songbird, about how the Latuses got involved and what their ultimate grand plan was and were they happy. So good, so meaningful. And every single twist and turn of the game is just giving you more and more information to go into your mind and just think, God, okay. I see what you were trying to do there. I see why that happened. And that occurrence that occurred in a previous game, I hadn't even thought about, but now you're actually putting it into some context, and now I can see how this whole universe revolves around each other. One of the big problems I had with Infinite was that the word infinite is really a general cop-out. As soon as you start throwing in things like infinite universes, things can get a little bit easy from a narrative standpoint, because any problems that occur and anything that doesn't make any sense, you can go, oh, it's not that universe. In this universe, this happens. And for an example, in part 1, we saw things like samurai soldiers being brought into the world. In what context does that make any sense for an underwater civilization? That there's now samurai statues and things like that really let that part of the game down. But in part 2, they ignored all that. They threw it all away. They just said, you know what? Forget all the gimmicky stuff that we're going to do with the Infinite Universe. This is our last blast. Our company no longer exists. We're not going to be making any more Bioshock games with these guys. So what we can do here is just answer all the questions. Let's get it out there. Let's lay our grand plan on the table and let the players experience it. And let's put it into the context that Bioshock exists in. Put it into the context that Rapture exists in, which is a scary, mean, brutal world. It's not Columbia. And that's why most people were excited for the Burial at Sea DLCs, that it wasn't going to be Columbia. We were returning to Rapture, which was a dark, evil place, and to see the fall of Rapture and how it occurred. And this DLC does not disappoint. Does not disappoint. I will say though, you're pretty much going to have to play part 1 for some of the things to make sense, and just to put everything in a little better context, and maybe even just to remind yourself of what happened in the other Bioshocks. Because although it's not a great DLC by any means, I actually think it's very, very poor. What it is an hour long, and then you get to jump into part 2, which is considerably longer. Huge amounts of exploration. I was shocked at how much exploration they put into this DLC. You can complete the linear story if you want to, but you're going to find yourself backtracking, working back, finding doors that need codes, and then going hunting for those codes which are hidden away and squirreled away in vents and all kinds of crazy audio logs that are just not in plain sight. You're going to be sneaking around a lot. This is a very stealthy game. A lot of people are going to be a bit put off by the idea that it's not just raw guns, balls to the wall. But then again, the gunplay wasn't that good. So the way they've got around that is make it very stealthy. Give you a character who can't take any punishment. Elizabeth just can't. Even on normal mode, you're going to find yourself being rocked down to very low health very quickly if you get caught. It's a stealthy game. Give it a try, guys. Really give it a try. I was made very content by this, because after playing part 1, I felt very dissatisfied and frustrated that I felt like I'd been cashed in on. I really felt like I'd been cashed in on something I really enjoyed. I enjoyed 1, I enjoyed 2, I enjoyed Infinite, and then Burial at Sea Part 1 really let that down. It really seemed to take the train off the tracks. This puts it not only back on, but turns it into a fucking jet plane. So good, so enjoyable. Love it. See you later, guys. Bye.